Hello, learner. Welcome to Mr. Quickest Teachers. In this lesson, I'll be providing a detailed analysis of Robert Lowell's poem, Night Sweat. I'll speak about the themes, the figures of speech, the point of view. Actually, there's a switch in point of view as the poem progresses. I'll speak about the poet's tone, the mood of the poem, poetic devices, the rhyme scheme, and other stylistic devices that Lowell uses to strikingly present the troubling, experience of a nameless persona. The poetic voice is actually the one that speaks in the night. The shifts in his experience as the night progresses. In fact, the poem actually always begins quite innocently, but then gravitates and then becomes very dark. And then from the 15th line to the 28th line of the poem, there's a shift, or what could be described as a volta in the poem. The first 14 lines, which is a sonnet, the first portion of the sonnet is Shakespearean. I'm going to talk about that in the elements of literature. So please listen to this full analysis and also listen to the accompanying analysis, which is the elements of literature in the poem. In that instance, I speak more directly on the the elements of literature in the poem. So the themes, I present them with flowing annotations. So listen to that analysis as well. Let's dive in. Now let's begin by speaking about the poet, Lowell. So Robert Trill Spence Lowell, that's his full name, was born on the 1st of March, 1917, and he passed on September 12th, 1977. He was an American poet. He was born into a Boston Bremen family that could trace its origins back to the Mayflower. So the Mayflower, it's like the beginnings of America, sort of, the country known as the United States of America today. It's a fascinating history, so I advise that you should look into it. Now, his family, past and present, were important subjects in his poetry. Now, growing up in Boston also informed his poems, so he drew inspiration from growing up in Boston, which were frequently set in Boston and the New England region. The literary scholar Paula Hayes believes that Lowell mythologized New England, particularly in his early work. So that's a brief note on the poet. I do not think that we should engage too much in his history. Instead, we should rather focus more on the poem, because that's the poem that it's in the poem that you're going to be examined on, whether you're writing the GCSE or IGCSE, depending on where you are, or any other exam for that matter, where the poem comes up. Now, this is how the poem appears on your anthology. It's on one page. I mean, here on the screen is a bit cramped, but I did that so that you see the full extent of the poem. When I begin the analysis and the transitions, you're going to see that it begins to, I break it down into the first 14 and then the second 14 lines. But this is how it appears. The entire poem actually is 28 lines, right? Now, one of the things I want you to note is that the poem appears to be two poems in one, like I've already mentioned or alluded to. So line 1 to line 14 is one poem. Appears to be, but then it's one poem. Appears to be. And then the second, from line 15 to 28, is the second part. So we're going to see that as I begin the analysis. Now, the first thing I want you to know is that the poetic voice opens the poem with visual imagery of the setting by naming innocent home furnishings and items that the reader would associate with the home workplace of a writer. His listing of simple furnishings and of office stationery also makes the opening two lines appear ordinary and gives the poem a sense of calm and normalcy. So that's one of the things I see in the poem, right? Furthermore, his naming of household items and furnishings makes the setting seem ordinary. So the word ordinary has been mentioned twice, but ordinary is key, the way the poem opens. Now, the first home furnishing he names is work table. We suggest that the setting is probably the interior of a study or a home office. Then the second is litter, like trash. This tells that it is strewn The entire place is strewn, maybe presumably with trash, paper, and ordinary stationery, other stationery waste. The third object that he names, right, books, strengthens the idea that he's in fact in his home office, or you can say library or study, possibly arrayed. So he has like books all over the place, which gives the impression that he loves to read and is, a writer, or, he loves to read and or is a writer. Now, the last item in the list is standing lamp. So this provides visual imagery of the kind of lamp that the poet uses. So this is one that can be focused directly on the page, moved around, and does not drown the entire room with lights at night. If he's writing at night and then he puts on the standing lamp, then the entire room is not drowned by light, right? Standing lamp also tells that he deliberately made arrangements for an alternative source of light, not just maybe the overhead lamps or lights or things like that, but then a lamp that can be moved about, so he can read and also write when it becomes dark. So that's the ordinary portions that I'm talking about, and especially you see that in the first two lines. Now, the poet uses a comma after he mentions the first two items. When he says work table, there's a comma. Letter, there's also comma. So the use of commas there creates short pauses and allows the reader some time to take a look and the name items. I'm going to talk about why he does that in a bit, why he lists, right? He ends the line with a comma, which creates another pause. Now, he flows into the second line of the poem with enjambment. And this is seen in the flow of words from the first line to the second, which allows him to continue listing. And remember, I talked about him using listing as the first device that we see. So work table, letter, book, standing up, all of this is listing. His use of enjambment also creates the impression that he has nothing to hide. So it doesn't need to delay the narration, right? It just needs the thing to just flow. He has nothing, and it's just revealing the normal aspects of his life. He then reiterates the innocence of the setting and the things he has characterized, he has named. So the four things he names in the first line by describing them or characterizing them as plain things, which tells the reader that they do not possess any deeper meaning and are common and are also simple looking. So we shouldn't think too much about them. Now, after a comma that marks a momentary pause, he adds my stalled equipment. Now, the first person pronoun my reveals that the persona or the poetic voice is speaking about himself, his life, and his properties. So all the things he's mentioned are his, right? And he also tells that the stored equipment tells that the device no longer works or has momentarily stopped working. So it's stalled. It used to work in the past, but now it's stalled. Stalled also suggests that the equipment deliberately decided to cease functioning. It's got that's the use of the word stalled. My car just stalled. So it just deliberately ceased to functioning. Finally, the poet's description of the equipment as stalled reminds the reader of the idiom, a bad workman blames his tools. That's what I just thought about when I read it and it says, stored equipment. In other words, the poetic voice may be blaming his equipment for his inability to work or write or whatever it is, but then it's stalled. So why can't you achieve, or why can't you do ABC? Well, because my equipment is stalled. He concludes the line by mentioning the old broom. That's the last thing he mentions in the second line. Another simple item that can be found in a home. I mean, most homes in that era, you find maybe a broom or something. But he describes it with the adjective old, which tells that the broom has experienced prolonged use and is weak. It also suggests, the word old also suggests that it has remained loyal and but it's no longer as effective as it once was. And I think in a sense, the poetic voice is also telling us about himself. He's no longer as effective as he used to be in the past. Now, the poetic voice's decision to mention the items in his room in lines 1 and 2 creates the impression that he's giving the reader a guided tour. So that is really key, because it comes across as very innocent. And the question, you ask yourself a question: why does he list these items? Right? So the fact that he's giving the reader a tour is really, really important. So it gives the impression that he's giving the reader a guided tour. Additionally, his listing of each item individually also creates the impression that he's pointing to them, right? One by one. So work table, letter, books, standing lamp. That's the impression that I get. So he's pointing to them one by one and introducing them to the reader. The way a house owner would do to a visitor to familiarize and make them feel comfortable during a visit. So he wants the reader to know that he wants them to familiarize themselves with this environment where he stays. They're his friends. If you visit somebody, for example, and then the person begins to give you a tour of the house, it speaks on their familiarity, how familiar they are with you. It's not something that they're going to do with everybody, especially people that they do not know. So he wants the reader to be very familiar with the setting and feel free, because he's going to start engaging them in a bit about a personal life. The line ends, the second line ends with a dash, which indicates a pause and suggests that the poet took a moment to catch his breath and organize his thoughts. Now, it continues into the third line of the poem by saying, "But I'm living in a tidied room." Right? This is quite shocking. Old room, but I'm living in a tidied room. Now, the conjunction "but" introduces contrast into the narration. The contrast is very striking because it shows that the poetic voice wants to convey that there's a paradox that exists between he's owning an old broom, right, and he living in a tidied room. So there's a paradox. I have an old broom, but then my house is tidy. Now, in essence, he wants the reader to realize that even though the broom is old, so it's not as effective as it once was, it can still be used to effect or ensure a tidied room. "I'm living in" also tells that is his current abode. That's where he lives. That's where he stays. Now, he, however, does not reveal to the reader how the room became tidy. He just says, "I'm living in a tidied room." In his inability to reveal how his room became, tidy, shows that he may be unsure of the circumstance through which he became clean himself. So he doesn't know. Now, this detail, if correct, suggests that he's a limited third-person narrator or poetic voice. Now, the poetic voice continues into the fourth line of the poem with enjambment. So you see again that there's a flow of words. So with enjambment, before opening up about his private life in the fourth and fifth lines with his revelation. "For 10 nights now, I've felt the creeping damp float over my pajamas with dead white." So see how the words flow. So which comes across as a shock to the reader, because that's not what he was talking about a minute ago, right? He was just talking about his room and the things in his room, but he just says, "For 10 nights now, I've felt the creeping damp float over my pajamas with dead white." So it comes across as a shock to the reader because they see a clear shift from him giving an innocent tour of his study or his house to him exposing aspects of his personal life to them. Now, "For 10 nights now" also shows that he's recounting a continuing experience. Now, one of the things about this poem is that the poet appears to be speaking in the present continuous, as if what he's saying is happening live, like in real time. So he's speaking about what he has experienced for 10 nights now and continues to experience even as he speaks. The idea of his continuing experience is emphasized by the word "now." So for 10 nights now, including now that I'm speaking. Now, for 10 nights now also shows that his experience has been consistent. That is, without any breaks. There has been no breaks in his experience. He has had the experience for 10 successive nights or consecutive nights without relief or respite. His confession makes the reader sympathize with him. So for 10 straight nights, unabatedly, he's experienced what he describes as creeping damp over him. Now also, the poetic voice's use of the contraction "have." So it doesn't say "I have," it says "have." Shows that he's speaking informally, right? He's speaking informally, and then the use of informal language is effective because it makes the reader feel more comfortable. So we are not here speaking in a formal sense with somebody we don't know. It's like someone who we've met and then just revealing aspects of his life to us as the readers, right? And then this creates the impression that he sees the readers as his friends. Now, if you combine this with what happened in the first 3 lines, you get this sense that the poetic voice wants the reader to be extremely comfortable. So he's using contractions, and he's also giving them a tour of his house to make them feel extremely comfortable as he relays the experience that he's had. Now, moreover, the word "felt" provides tactile imagery of the sense with which he experienced his troubles. So he reveals to the reader the sense of touch with which he experienced his troubles. Why the expression "the creeping damp" provides vivid visual imagery of the damp traveling on his body. So the bit by bit, it is traveling bit by bit, almost sneakingly or stealthily. Right. Now, additionally, the poet's use of creeping to characterize how the damp travels personifies it. Why? Because the word creeping there is a verb. So that personifies the damp and creates the effect that it is being deliberately slow. Now, when something is creeping, it is being deliberately slow so that it can sneak up and pounce on him without detection. So without him knowing, it's just going to sneak up on him. It doesn't want to be too quick. It's creeping down on him. Like just think about the way like a lion or something, will try to creep up on a prey and then just catch it. So it wants to, the damp wants to pounce on him without detection. Now, creeping damp also suggests that the damp has been increasing in size over the 10 nights. So it's been growing in size as well. So that's a second explanation for the word creeping. Hello, learner. I hope you've enjoyed the lesson so far. This is a sample video analysis of this poem. To access the full analysis, purchase it or the entire course with detailed analysis of all the 15 poems, the elements of literature in each poem, and IGCSE style questions, both passage-based and general. There are also A-star quality sample essays as well at mrquakersteaches.com. Find the links in the description. See you in class.